Chapter 9 Awareness, the Fourth. A gentle breeze flowed across the peaceful river. The leaves on the thick vegetation on both of its banks swayed to its rhythm. The morning sun threw millions of reflections through the wavelets, converting the flowing water into liquid gold. The sun's warmth permeated the whole atmosphere. The gentle gurgling sound of the flowing water was like a monotone to the natural sounds of the bird songs and crickets. On one of the banks sat two friends arguing on the eternal conflict between existence and non-existence of God, totally unconscious of the beauty and peace that surrounded them. Both of them were so involved as to give an impression that winning the argument was a question of life and death. Nearly after 4 hours, it appeared as though there was no end to it. Both of them were exhausted, and in that state of exhaustion were forced to observe the external silence and balance. It had a magical influence on them. The gentle sounds that surrounded them forced their minds into a deeper state of receptivity. They felt they heard a voice from under the water as though it was that of a fish. You always say that we are surrounded by water, which is the source of all life. Where is it? There was a pause, followed by a gentler voice. I still say we are overpowered by it. But how can I show it to you unless you feel it? Suddenly, the friends experienced a moment of intimacy that clarified their doubt and uncertainty. The great mystic poet Kabir Das has observed in one of his couplets, हाँ कहूँ तो कहाँ है, ना ही कहाँ न जाए, हाँ नहीं के बीच में साहब मोर समाए. If I say yes, where is he? I cannot say no. My master is in between yes and no. The phenomenon of doubt, like everything else in the existence, is a paradox. Without it, life is just reduced to vegetation, as one tends to take everything for granted and continues to be ignorant. With it, life becomes a meaningful existence as the doubt lights the lamp of inquiry. However, with an overdose of doubt, life becomes torturous as it refuses to accept even the most obvious of the facts. The Upanishads and the spiritual tradition as a whole recommend the middle path. Doubt is a natural offshoot of growth, which cannot and should not be suppressed. At the same time, we should also take care to see that it is used as a slave and not nurtured to the extent of becoming its slaves. For avoiding this pitfall, the rishis insisted on the inner observation while using the doubt. The inner observation, or samyagavekshanam as it's called, helps us avoid making the spirituality into a mere intellectual exercise, as it happened in the West, where it remained as philosophy, which is mostly speculation or a cerebral occupation. Existence or reality transcends all definition because definition limits that which is being defined. If one were to say that a thing is such and has such quality, the statement also implies what it is not and the qualities it does not have. The unlimited cannot be defined at all, as any definition uses language, and language as such, any language, is limited and incomplete. And yet, a seeker needs to understand what she or he is seeking. The Upanishadic sages developed a unique way of pointing at the truth or giving hints through paradoxes. They were convinced that the method of paradoxes was the only effective way. For providing hints and to indicate the infinite nature of the ultimate reality, they said, Anejadekam manaso javiyo nainad deva apnuvan purvamarshad tadhavato anyanatyeti tishtatu tasminnapo matarishvo dadhati tadejati tannejati taddure tadvantike tadantarasya sarvasya tadu sarvasyasya bahyatah. Ishavasyopanishad. The self is one. It is unmoving, yet it is faster than the mind. Thus moving faster, it is beyond the reaches of senses. Ever steady, it outstrips everything that runs. By its mere presence, the cosmic energy is overpowered to sustain the activities of the living beings. It moves not. It is far, it is verily near. It is inside all this. It is outside all this. Just a superficial glance and these verses look illogical or even ridiculous. But this is the only way in which they could describe their profound experience in the limited verbal knowledge and language and give to the posterity an intimation or hint on the immortality residing in every being. Not only did they try the impossible and succeeded in leaving behind a legacy of grand mystical poetry by trying to describe that which is beyond language, but more than succeeded in guiding the future seekers. Almost every Upanishad gives out a path through the indirect or sometimes paradoxical description of what the Rishi of the Upanishad experienced. The most wonderful aspect of the Upanishadic literature is that no one claimed any authorship of these scriptural treasures, not because they were unsure of themselves, but because they were convinced that their experience was only a part of all pervasive reality which was manifesting through their expression. This reality of their experience was the right of every human being, nay, the whole existence. This attitude proves beyond any doubt of their infinite compassion for the suffering and the groping humanity. Having understood and observed wakefulness, dream and deep sleep, one cannot help noticing a common thread that runs as an undercurrent during the three states of consciousness. It is the common factor which acts as a witness, unaffected and unattached to these three states. At the same time, it's not a state either. Unable to give any name to it, the rishis called it Turiya, the fourth. Mandukyopanishad describes it. Nantah prajñam na bahish prajñam no bhayatah prajñam na prajñanaghanam na prajñam na prajñam adrishtham avyavaharyam agrahyam alakshanam achintyam avyapadeshyam ekatma pratyayasaram prapanchopashamam shantam shivamadvaitam chaturtham manyante sa atma sa vidneyah. They consider the fourth to be that which is not conscious of the internal world, nor conscious of the external world, nor conscious of both the worlds, nor a mass of consciousness, nor is it the state of unconsciousness, which is unseen, beyond empirical dealings, beyond the grasp of the organs of action, non-inferable, unthinkable, inconsiderable, whose valid proof consists in the single trust in the self, in which all phenomena cease, and which is unchanging, auspicious and non-dual. That is the self, and that is to be known. Aristotelian logic which has influenced human thought, would never be able to accept the description of Turiya given by the above mantra. The Rishi uses another technique here, the technique of negation. A classical example is given by the Vedanta to explain this. A man in search of something in a dark room goes on negating other things. After rejecting everything, he discovers what he needs at last and which he cannot describe through the limited language. Or the example so often used by Shankaracharya. In twilight, one mistakes a piece of rope to be a snake, or a line of water, or a crack in the ground, resulting in various emotions like fear and flight. Unless one negates impositions to recognize the reality of rope, one continues to be under the influence of emotions. The removal of the superimpositions and the recognition of the rope are simultaneous. Similarly, in the above mantra, all the three states of wakeful, dream, and deep sleep have been summarily rejected, lest the seeker should confuse Turiya to be either one or a combination of the two or more of the three states. Shankaracharya comments, by the phrase not conscious of the internal world is eliminated Taijasa. By not conscious of the outside world is eliminated Vishwa. By not conscious of either is ruled out the intermediate state between dream and waking. By not a mass of consciousness is denied the state of deep sleep, for this consists a state of latency where everything becomes indistinguishable. By not simple consciousness is negated the awareness of everything simultaneously by a single act of consciousness. By not unconsciousness is negated insentience. Human history is filled with instances when we conveniently adopted the simpler aspects of existence just because it was easy or because the reality demands much effort. The process of negation has been called as the process of neti neti, or not this, recommended by the Upanishads in one such instance. Those who are the slaves of the intellect or reason are likely to misunderstand this process. Intellectual negation happens to be quite simple. There is another anecdote of a person who used to deliver lectures on religion. He was very effective and impressive on his audience. Once during the course of his discourse, he mentioned the necessity of taking pure food. He went to the extent of giving all the details. He included onions in the prohibitive list. Coincidentally, his wife too happened to listen to this discourse. As he reached home and his wife announced dinner, happily he sat in front of the served plate. To his angry surprise, he found onions missing. When he shouted at his wife and sought an explanation, his wife only said that she had followed all his instructions and had not included tamasic food in his dinner. Caught unawares, he justified that the lecture was only meant for ordinary people and not him, who was an established man of knowledge. We not only befool ourselves, but ourselves, which is really more dangerous. Taking mere intellectual understanding to be ultimate, we remain under the influence of senses, mind, reason and ego. Intellectual understanding is no doubt recommended, but is not mandatory for one who starts the spiritual practice. In fact, spiritual practice begets understanding as a matter of course. How do we get attached to anything? In Kalahari Desert region of Botswana, there is a tribe. They have a wonderful method of finding out the sources of water. They catch a variety of monkeys of the region that is very fond of salt. What they do is to drill holes in the boulders of the size just enough for the monkey to insert its wrist with elongated fingers. When it puts the hand inside and grabs the salt in its fist, it is unable to retrieve the hand outside. The monkeys get caught this way. The monkey is then forced to eat the salt in fairly large quantities, and the tribesmen have the technique of making the monkeys release the fists. Due to the intake of salt, the thirsty monkeys lead men to the source of water. The story of man is not really different from the Kalahari monkeys. His fist of the greed to grab ties him to the world, while the animals never tried to justify their weakness. Man has learned to use his intellect to become a past master on justifications. The difference also lies in the fact that man is tied to the world in a much more intense way than he realizes. He is tied through his body, senses, mind, intellect, dreams, emotions, as well as ego. During Jagrat or wakeful state, his tentacles, if one may use the word, to grab the world are his body, senses and mind through which he perceives the external world. He grabs the images, ideas, memories of experience through intellect and memory during swapna or dream and mental imagination. When he is neither grabbing the external objects nor the imaginary internal world, he is overpowered by the unconscious sushupti or deep sleep. This process of grabbing and moving from one state to another goes on unconsciously and mechanically like an automaton. Spirituality suggests methods to open the windows and let the light of awareness into our dark life that is characterized by unconsciousness. The Rishis used the Upanishads for recording the observations made during their inner experiments so that the seekers can conduct those very experiments and see for themselves the truth behind the statements. Since these dialogues took place much before writing, not to mention printing, was developed, the Upanishadic literature had to be handed from mouth to ear, which necessarily made the statements brief or aphorismic. The Upanishads give only broad hints and leave out the practical details to the masters for transferring them to their disciples. Fortunately, the details have been preserved by an unbroken master-disciple tradition, which happens to be the greatest asset to our glorious country. For the sifting mind of a sincere seeker, however, the broad hints in the Upanishads by themselves are sufficient to give deeper insights. If we observe ourselves, we discover that our consciousness gets not only involved with but identified with the bodies and senses. In this sense, we are not in the body, but we are the bodies. This is one of the greatest puzzles because the knower can never be the known. In other words, the observer or the source of consciousness can never be the object. All our experiences at body-mind through senses are necessarily different from the one who experiences. Yet apparently, the knower becomes the known and the experiencer becomes the experienced. We behave as if we are the bodies. The solution to this problem lies in the answer to the question why. Gaudapada observes in his Karika. Karya karana baddhau tavishyete vishwataijasau pratnya karana baddhastu dvau tau turyana siddhyataha. Vishwa and Taijasa, these two are held to be conditioned by cause and effect. Prajna is conditioned by cause. But both these, that is cause and effect, do not affect Turiya. The wakeful and dream states are basically effects of the desire for pleasure and avoidance of pain as the root cause. We get identified with anything pleasurable because we feel identified with the pleasure, our pleasure increases. The senses and the gross part of the mind or manas, which are naturally outgoing towards their respective objects, get easily identified with the objects, and the experiencer in turn gets identified with the senses and mind. For example, when we watch a movie of our choice, we forget ourselves, the viewers, who desire to enjoy and get lost in the moving pictures. It is our common experience that the more we are lost or are forgetful about the viewers, the more we enjoy the movie. If, on the other hand, we keep remembering the time or conscious of something else, or the mind and senses refuse to get involved with the objects, we do not enjoy the movie. We extend our identification with our bodies and senses and their objects because we experience the pleasure during this process of identification. A sense of separateness results in the experience of pain. This wrong impression causes deep of involvement. However, in the movie, nothing moves but only appears to move because of the speed of the film that runs at a particular speed on the spool in front of the light. The screen and the light are totally unaffected by the frames of images in the film. In a similar manner, the mind and the vibrations of senses stimulate certain centers that give an apparent feeling of the experience. The identification with the objects is so fast that it gives an impression of the sensation of pleasure. Moreover, the same object which gives pleasure to one may bring about an opposite result to the other. It is also not necessary that it should bring pleasure to one all the time. But the hankering for pleasure forces us to overlook these essential facts, making us blind and bound to the body, senses, and the respective objects. Mandukya Upanishad gives us a technique of non-identification by giving the details of the three states of consciousness. The negation proffered by the above Upanishadic mantra is not intellectual but existential. It just tells us that the external world of objects is experienced during the wakeful state, and the inner world of images, thoughts, dreams, and desires is experienced by someone who is untouched by and unidentified to them. For any experience, three things are mandatory: the experienced object or state, the act of experiencing, and the one who experiences. While the objects and the experience, pleasure or pain, and other pairs of opposites or the three states keep changing, the experiencer remains unchanged and never moves. This is due to the fact that it transcends all experiences, the states as well as the three facets of time experienced as the past, future, and present. The seeker naturally wants to know the method of being in Turiya or the fourth. The habit of identifying oneself with the objects and the experience is so stubborn that it appears quite arduous. The enlightened masters gave hundreds of techniques of developing prajnanam or awareness depending on the attitude and aptitude of the seeker. Though it's not possible to go into the details of the individual methods, we can definitely try to understand the principles involving these methods. It was noticed by the rishis that normally almost all of us have the tendency of doing anything mechanically. We get used to any act through the tendency of habit formation. When a child starts walking, it is so conscious of each step, so attentive to the act that there is no other thought. If its attention is diverted by any stimulus, it falls. But as it grows up, it can do other things simultaneously. A grown up man broods, worries, plans, and schemes while walking. This is only natural because instinct happens to be a very old companion during our long and arduous evolution from the mineral to animal and from animal to human life. As mentioned in an earlier essay, poise, peace, and plenty characterized the Upanishadic times. Even an average person was more calm and less occupied mentally with his desires and ambitions. So, the rishis just asked the seekers to be more aware of the thought and its manifestations. It was enough for a seeker to turn his gaze inwards to become aware of the thought processes. The Upanishad is pointing to this awareness and calls it as Turiya the fourth. By describing the details of the three states of consciousness experienced by each one of us, Mandukyopanishad suggests the seeker to jump out of the river of experience and stand on the bank of Turiya, the state of Shantam, peace, Shivam, auspiciousness, and Advaitam, non-duality. In the next 5 verses, the Upanishad appears to suggest at developing the awareness by comparing the 3 states with the 3 letters that constitute Om, the mystic syllables. Soyamatma adhyaksharam omkarodhimatra pada matra matrascha pada akara ukaraha makara iti. This pure self and Om are as one, and the different quarters on the self correspond to Om and its syllabus A, U, and M. Consciousness and sound are connected very intimately. A whole branch of wisdom based on the sound and its effects was developed by our rishis that is presently lost to us. They discovered that specific sounds have specific effect on the body-mind. The sound Om is considered to be the most sacred. All the Vedic literature is full of praise for this sound. It is believed by many that Amen and Amin, the most sacred words in the Judaic religions, are only the changed versions of Om. After discussing the details of the 3 states of consciousness, which move like waves over the calm ocean of Turiya, the substratum of all, the Rishi compares them with the 3 syllables of Om. By pure self is meant when there is no content left in the consciousness. It is like a mirror without any reflection on it. There is absolutely no activity on the surface of the consciousness, like a still, calm pond without any ripple whatsoever. Om is a formula very much like H2O representing the reality. It is not written in any ordinary Sanskrit letter, but has a special symbol Om. It consists of 3 sounds along with the 4th, the soundless sound. There are only 3 audible sounds, and the 4th that cannot ever be heard by the ears. The trinity of sounds forms the basis, and all the sounds produced arise out of these 3. And these 3 have arisen out of the 4th represented by a dot in the symbol. The dot is called Anuswara. Man is also exactly like Om because he is a miniature universe. By understanding man, we can decipher the whole of existence. Khalil Gibran says somewhere, By meditating on a dewdrop, I understood the secret of the ocean. Each one of us is like a dewdrop of existence, the whole. The best way to understand the existence, truth or God, is by understanding oneself. Jagaritastano Vaishwanaraha Akaraha Prathama Matra Apteradik Adim Adimatvat Dvapnoti Havai Sarvan Kaman Adischa Bhavati Ya Evam Veda. Vaishwanara, having the wakeful state as his sphere, is the first letter A. Because of the similarity of pervasiveness or being the first, whoever awakens to this verily acts in freedom, achieves success to become the foremost. At the individual level, sound A corresponds to the experience of the outer world. It is the wakeful state governed by the flow of consciousness towards the external world of objects. By such outward flow, much is achieved. Science and technology and all material development is the outcome of this outward flow. The West, governed by the chain of discontent, desire, effort and achievement, is the manifestation of such outward flow, which can be called as extroversion. But what the Rishi is referring to is not such obsessive extroversion characterized by the indulgence at the body sense level and involvement at the mental and emotional level. The above mantra is suggesting the seeker to be aware of the subtle mechanism of the mental activity during the moments of involvement and indulgence. However, our times are such that we have developed the expertise of involvement with our desires and the means of their fulfillment. There is so much noise in our minds that most of us find it very difficult, if not impossible, to notice the subtle mental processes. Perhaps Gautama the Buddha has a more practical solution to our problem of somnambulism. He suggested that all actions should be performed mindfully, even breathing, which we normally take for granted, is to be done mindfully. This helps us to avoid our habitual occupations on desires or projections into future and to be in the present. Beginning with such gross actions like breathing, walking, eating, etc., we can slowly become aware of each mental mood like anger, lust, greed, infatuation, pride and jealousy. Why? Even each thought. Such awareness helps us discover another very important fact, that the one who is aware is different from action and thought. This standing apart from the river of experience, as though one is standing on the bank observing the river flow, is the first and the most important step in the right direction. The Upanishad continues by giving the observation on the dream state and the sound corresponding to it. Swapnasthana tejasa ukaro dvitiya matra utkarshat ubhayodvetarkarshati havai jnana santatim samanascha bhavati nasya brahmavit kule bhavati ya evam veda. Taijasa, with the state of dream as a sphere of activity, is the second sound U. This initiates upholding and unification. Whoever awakens to this upholds the tradition of wisdom and unifies the diversities of life. Everything that comes along speaks to him of Brahman. Being in the wakeful state creates science as its extroversion or an objective approach involving analysis. Science, as we are very much aware, has only helped us to multiply our unending desires and in increasing our discontent. State of dreaming is introversion, which creates art, poetry, music, etc. The East has given the greatest of poets, musicians, and dancers. It has shown very great sensitivity towards nature and fellow beings. This is due to the fact that introversion is subjective and can happen only in a milieu of synthesis. Schopenhauer wrote, "The deliverance of wisdom from servitude of desire, the forgetting of individual self from its material interests, the elevation of the mind to the desireless contemplation of truth is the function of art. The object of science is the universal that contains particulars. The object of art is the particular that contains the universal." There are, however, many negative aspects and dangers in introversion. This is due to the fact that introversion forces one to remain closed within one's own shell, bringing in self-complacence. The East, which has given sensitivity to the world, has been essentially in dream state. A dreamer is cut off from the ground or external reality. The result, unfortunately, is that by totally ignoring the scientific development, the East, and especially India, has been chronically poor and could easily be oppressed by foreign tyranny. We have remained a slave country not for 1 or 2 centuries, but for a millennium. Our past orientation has made us lethargic and complacent. The West, through its view on the future, has been so intensely nurturing scientific thought and activity in general that there is problem of insomnia. If, however, one learns to turn the look inward without sticking to the past and develop the non-involved witnesshood, the Upanishad says one starts seeing the hand of divine in every situation and stimulus. This is where the Vedantic Antarmukhata differs from introversion. While introversion is an unconscious involvement in the imaginary objects of the senses through thoughts and dreams, Antarmukhata is becoming aware of the whole process of involvement. During the wakeful state, if one is aware of the process of indulgence with the sense objects, it becomes Antarmukhata. There is, however, the danger of mistaking the involvement with thoughts, images, memories and dreams to be Antarmukhata, which happened in our country. The Mandukya Upanishad compares the third state of Sushupti with the letter M. Sushuptasthanah pradnyo makarasthritiya matra miterapi terva minoti hava idam sarvam apitischa bhavati ya evam veda. Pradnya, with the sphere of activity in the sleep state, is the third letter of Om. This initiates measurement and merging. Whoever awakens to this merges with the world and has the measure of all things. The earlier mantra described the state of Sushupti, giving the quality of unconsciousness and experience of the negative pleasure in the absence of either the desire for objects in the wakeful state or the memories of their experience through dreams. This verse proceeds further by introducing the practical aspect of measurement and merging. Shankaracharya explains, this is the analogy here. Mite, measure, because of measuring. Miti means to measure. As barley is measured by the vessel called prastha, so are Vishwa and Taijasa measured, as it were, because of their entry into and coming out of pradnya during desolation deep sleep, and origination coming out to either dream or wakeful state. Similarly, too, at the end of the pronunciation of the syllable Om and at the time of its fresh pronunciation, the letters A, U seem to enter into the last letter M to come out again from it. Va apitehe, or because of absorption, apiti means getting merged or united in. In the like manner, Vishwa and Taijasa merge into Prajna at the time of sleep. This analogy also proves that Prajna and the letter M are identical. The result obtained by the man of wisdom is stated here. Minoti havai idam sarvam. He measures all this universe, that is to say, he knows its reality and becomes the place of absorption of the universe, that is, the self in its causal state. There is a tribe on one of the thousands of islands in the Pacific region. The peculiarity is that there is not even a single case of madness or suicide or murder. When the people tried to find out the reasons for the singular sanity of the tribe, it was discovered that they gave tremendous importance to dreams. It is said that right from the childhood, the members of the tribe are trained to remember and narrate their dreams, while the elders and the experienced members analyze those dreams. For example, if a child dreams that he has slapped the neighboring child in dream, it is asked to seek pardon from the victim in its dream. Not only it has to seek forgiveness from the child, but it has to give gifts to compensate for the pain. Similarly, if someone commits any antisocial activity in dream, they have to seek forgiveness from their victim. The reason given is that there must be some unconscious hatred or violence in the mind which come in the form of the dreams. Paradoxically, we who call ourselves educated and cultured have become insensitive to our dreams. We hardly remember them, and even if we do, we laugh them off. Our wakeful activity is directly related to our dreams, and the deep sleep happens to be their measure. The intensity of thought in the wakeful state or dreams in the dream state can be felt when we enter or come out of the deep sleep state. If we try to observe the mechanism of sleep, and we have to learn this art if we intend taking the help of this lofty Upanishad, we notice that the moment we come out of our sleep, the mind continues to be in the residual mood of relaxation or disturbance as we enter or come out of the deep sleep. While chanting the pranava or Om, the sounds A, U merge into and come out of Ma, this last sound of Om. This is what has been described by Acharya Shankara in his commentary. Though the extroversion in the wakeful state involves intense activity through indulgence with sense objects, it is temporal and fleeting. The dream state, characterized by introversion through the involvement and unfulfilled desires or hidden urges and fears, is again away from the reality. Both these states are governed by the duality. The deep sleep state, however, transcends duality as the attention is neither on the outside of objects nor on the reflections, and still it is very much away from the reality. There is one more step, says the Rishi in the Upanishad. Amatrascha turya avyavaharyah prapanchopashamah shivodvaita evam omkara atmaiva samvishatyatmanatmanam ya evam veda. The partless Om, the pure self alone, that which is indivisible, which cannot be described, the supreme good, the one without the other, that corresponds to the wholeness of Om. Whoever awakens to that becomes the Self. Though there is no duality in deep sleep, there is darkness and ignorance aplenty, as it is nothing but a mass of unconsciousness, whereas Turiya, or the fourth, is strictly not a state but transcendence of all the states. It is beyond all dimensions and descriptions. The students of mathematics know that a point does not have any dimension. In the symbol of Om, Turiya is the Bindu or the point. The symbol only points out the fact that it transcends all experience, as it is the one who experiences. No song can sing it, no poetry can contain it, no music can vibrate it, as song, poetry and music come under the purview of experience. The Vedic tradition gives extreme importance to Pranava or the Om. All the mantras begin and end with Pranava. Though the seekers are encouraged to use this symbol of reality based as it is with the states of consciousness, the goal is really towards the soundless, the dimensionless, that transcends all states and all description. If one contemplates, one is surprised to discover that in reality, however, there is really no goal as such, for goal is normally taken as something outside the one who is striving to reach it. The goal is to reach the one who is seeking it. Hence, there is no reaching, only being. All those who have awakened, the Upanishadic seers, the Buddha, Mahavir, Christ, etc., have always insisted that they have not achieved anything new, but only remembered what they always had. Many Vedantic texts like Ashtavakra Gita say that the question of how to achieve is the cause for many a seeker getting lost in the mire of confusion, because there is nowhere to go. Though intellectually we may understand this, practically or existentially it's very difficult. Used as we are to either the attention to the outside world of objects or to the inner world of ideas and dreams, many of us are not even aware of the dreamless and the deep sleep. And when our attention is on neither, we plunge into unconsciousness of deep sleep. Even when we are in the wakeful state, we are totally unaware, as our attention is only towards the action or the external object and never on the actor or the experiencer. George Gurdjieff used to say that we are asleep most of the time and all our actions are somnambulistic. In this sense, the state we call wakeful is only make-believe wakefulness. Our pains and gains are all really accidental in the sense that we do not have any control over them. However, with all the difficulties, we should understand that we have only one state, the waking state, for developing the awareness, as the other two states are not really under our control. Normally, our consciousness is about something, either an object or a person or a thought. The arrow of consciousness has only one head, and that is directed away from the entity who is the experiencer or the thinker. We take a step towards the awareness when we make the arrow of consciousness double-headed. That is, it is not only conscious of the object or thought outside, but also the experiencer or the thinker. For instance, when one is walking, one should not only be conscious of the road, the breeze that is caressing the hair, or the nature around, but also of Karta, the walker, Drishta, the seer of the beauty, or Bhokta, the enjoyer. While reading, one should be conscious of the matter being read, as well as Jnata, the one who is reading and understanding. One can comprehend this more on a meditation seat. Invariably, the mind starts wandering after the initial settling. It starts getting all types of thoughts. Suddenly, one gets a flash of the memory that one is sitting on the meditation seat and is trying to calm down the mind. This flash comes from the one who is sitting for meditation. Thus, the arrow of the consciousness becomes double-sided. Similarly, we generally go from one state to another, from the wakeful to dream, and from dream to deep sleep, quite suddenly and unconsciously. If we learn to observe the mind going from one state to another, we are able to feel the presence of the one who is conscious of these states that come and go, not unlike the moving pictures on a still screen. There are many techniques for developing the consciousness during the dream state, just like in the wakeful state, where we can be simultaneously conscious of the object and the experiencer of the objects. We can be conscious of the dreams and the dreamer. As and when this observation becomes stable, one realizes that we can be conscious of the objects or the thoughts from the level of bhokta and drishta if one wants, or just be conscious without any object. When this happens, we can safely say that we have the awareness. A lamp lights up all the objects present in the room or under its light. Even if the objects do not exist, the light is very much there unto itself, proving its presence. What stops us from being aware is the age-old habit. As from childhood to dotage, we have been giving importance to the objects, thoughts, or have been unconscious. It is like a person forgetting himself or herself while watching a scene through the window and identifying with the scene. Even if the self, the bhokta, the karta, or the drishta is forgotten, it is very much there. Even if the self is doubted, the doubter is very much there. This is what all the enlightened persons mean when they keep repeating that we never lose it, we only forget it. No effort is needed, only recollection. When we hear this instruction, we are bound to get confused. If we peep into the lives of the great, we find that they have put years and sometimes decades of effort in achieving what they achieved. When the Buddha went back to his kingdom and stood in front of his wife asking for alms, she asked him whether it was necessary for him to leave the kingdom and family to achieve nirvana. The Buddha replied that he had not achieved anything new and that it was not at all necessary to either leave the kingdom or family or even put the arduous effort for 12 years. And had he known this, he would have never left. This happens to be one of the greatest paradoxes in spirituality. If we do not seek the ultimate reality, then we get deep into the identification of body-mind and thus fall into deep ignorance. And by seeing it, we tend to move away from it. By seeking it, we tend to move away from it. Ishavasya Upanishad appears to point this out. Andham tamah pravishanti ye avidyam upasate tato bhuya ivate tamo yahu vidyayam rataha. Those who worship avidya, that which binds us to the world of action, enter into blinding darkness. But into greater darkness do they enter who are engaged in vidya, wisdom. For most of us, spirituality is a luxury, as we are indulged in sense occupations or material possessions or involved with our likes and dislikes, desires and ideas. In this sense, we are in blinding darkness of ignorance, totally unaware of the things outside I and mine. According to Mandukya Upanishad, we are mostly in first two states of so-called wakeful and dream states, and are oblivious of the deep sleep and, of course, Turiya the fourth. When life becomes tense and disturbing due to the over-involvement, most of us try to find solutions outside itself, as we are aware only of the outside world of objects. But some of us start seeking alternatives in the inner dimension. Ishavasyopanishad tries to warn such seekers that there are greater dangers of losing oneself in the mire of words and activity. The Buddha's life is wonderful in the sense that it offers light to all the seekers. Having left his kingdom and dear ones, Siddhartha Gautama spent many years wandering, from one guru to another, learning from them different techniques, but failing to achieve the final emancipation. After finished learning, the guru would ask him to move on, as there was nothing more he could offer Siddhartha. Siddhartha, in turn, tried to whatever was told to him: vigil, fast, body distortion, breathing and meditation, but always felt deep inside that he was missing something and the secret lay somewhere else. At the end of long, arduous 12 years, he was totally frustrated with all methods. He gave up the search and slept peacefully, deeply, without any mental activity for the first time in those 12 years. This dropping of all effort brought about the recollection, which has been called as Pratyabhijna in Vedanta. He realized that he always had this awareness, even in his ignorance. It was this that was witnessing the acts of ignorance. When he was in pain, it was this that witnessed the pain. This again it was that witnessed the deep sleep and rest. And it was this that put itself behind each act as I. Laughter happens to be the first outcome of enlightenment. Laughter resulting from the realization that due to the foolish notion one wasted so much time and energy in seeking that which was always there. Nay, one was really seeking the seeker who had embarked on the adventure of seeking. One cannot possibly fight with darkness, because darkness as such does not exist, as it is only the absence of light. Or we cannot fight with the dream tiger or lion. All we can and should do is to wake up. Upanishads are those strong sirens or alarm clocks that have been trying to wake us up.